Al-Jama'ah a consensus, and he is the spiritual leader of the Muslim Brotherhood group designated as terrorists. If the Al-Jama'ah needs someone to blow himself up into a congregation of people, they must organize the operation with the least casualties if possible, and preferably the bomber should survive too. One must submit to the Al-Jama'ah and not act alone. Ladies and gentlemen, these are the words of Yusuf al-Qaradawi, who's also known as the godfather of the Muslim Brotherhood group, designated as terrorists. He's an Egyptian fugitive sentenced to death on terrorism charges, who now lives freely in Qatar under the protection of the Al Thani ruling family. The picture you see in front of you, which is of the Emir of Qatar, Tamim Al Thani, kissing the head of al-Qaradawi, just days after the blockade on Qatar started. This man had a weekly show on Al Jazeera Arabic, which at one time had an estimated audience of 60 million people. There is a difference between freedom of expression and insightful rhetoric that poisons the minds of people and possibly inspire them. We journalists challenge governments all the time with our pens and cameras and take every opportunity to call on world leaders to respect press freedom and refrain from jailing journalists. Just as we expect governments to abide by basic human rights, we also expect news outlets like Al Jazeera to respect the ethics of journalism, stop endangering the lives of its staff, and refrain from sponsoring groups like the Muslim Brotherhood, Al-Nusra, an affiliate of Al-Qaeda, and other terrorist groups. There is a difference between the bias of many TV channels in the media today and the sponsorship of a cause for your own agenda, and in this case, it's Qatar's agenda. And that is why we are here today, and I thank you for coming. I have sued Al Jazeera Media Network in May 2015 in the British Columbia Court for negligence, misrepresentation, and breach of contract only after putting my investigative journalism skills to work in prison and during my time out on bail before returning back to prison again. Both parties have submitted numerous supportive documents. The witnesses will be cross-examined in the near future before the public hearing scheduled for January 2018. We want the case to take place in the fair and honorable Canadian courts, and Al Jazeera wants the trial to take place in Qatar, a nation that secretly tried a poet who wrote a poem praising the Arab Spring and jailed him for close to 4 years, a judicial system that banned Qatar's former Justice Minister, Dr. Najib al-Naimi, from traveling, an arbitrary and unexplained travel ban, according to Amnesty International. My defense in the retrial in Egypt was based around attempting to convince the judge to separate between the responsibilities of we journalists and Al Jazeera. My colleagues and I, including cameraman Mohammed Fawzi, did not conspire with the Muslim Brotherhood group designated as terrorists. Al Jazeera did, and on behalf of the Qatari government, who control the general direction of the coverage. My lawyers have collected affidavits from former senior Al Jazeera employees, former members of the Qatari government, including a former Qatari diplomat, and legal experts to corroborate every word in my lawsuit. Allow me to present you with just a small sample of the evidence. Before I joined Al Jazeera English in September 2013, and Mohammed Fawzi was deployed to Egypt, all the Al Jazeera channels illegally used the technology in the Egyptian state TV broadcast truck that was violently stolen by members of the Muslim Brotherhood in the Rab al-Adawiyya sit-in close to 6 weeks. The following is an excerpt from an official report filed by Mr. Shukri Abu Amera, head of the Board of Trustees of the Egyptian State TV, to the Interior Ministry, the Intelligence, and the Military. He says, quote unquote, on July 4th, 2013, we were surprised that the state TV truck was used to broadcast the Rab al-Adawiyya sit-in to Al-Quds and Al-Aqsa TV channels. For those who don't know, they are Palestinian channels known as mouthpieces for Hamas, a group designated as terrorists by the US, Canada, among other nations. He also says, quote unquote, on July 5th, 2013, we learned that the state TV truck was used to broadcast Rab al-Adawiyya on Al Jazeera. The technicians were assaulted by supporters of the former president and kicked out of the sit-in. In the press kit presented to the journalists here, you will find a signed testimony acquired by my Egyptian lawyer, Mohammed Nabawi, from Ahmed Gamal Said, a former Al Jazeera English security guard who was present in the sit-in. A brief quote from his affidavit says, when I was working for Al Jazeera English channel in Rabat protest, which was led by the Muslim Brotherhood, I saw the members of the organization forcibly taking over the Egyptian television's car and cooperated with all the channels and journalists of Al Jazeera during the protest and allowed Al Jazeera English, Al Jazeera Arabic, and Al Jazeera Mubashir to broadcast live on the air using the technology available in the car. During my trial in Egypt, known as the Marriott Cell, I hired my own lawyers. Longtime Al Jazeera lawyer Mr. Farag Fati represented my colleagues Peter Greste and Bahar Mohammed in the case. He abruptly quit in court on May 15th, weeks before our 7-year sentence was announced. He also announced that he had emails that prove Al Jazeera is working against the interests of us journalists in the cage. Mr. Farag also objected to a $150 million compensation claim Al Jazeera filed against the Egyptian government in London and most recently in Washington, D.C. He said the lawsuit could jeopardize the defense's case and impact any sympathetic reaction he might have been able to garner from the court. Did Al Jazeera ask journalists, us, before suing Egypt or even listen to their lawyer? No. Mr. Farag also said, according to quotes published in Agence France Presse, Al Jazeera is using my clients. I have emails from the channel telling me they don't care about the defendants and care about insulting Egypt. During my research, I read and acquired some of these emails. Most shockingly is an email sent from a senior legal counsel at Al Jazeera to Mr. Farag, asking him to represent a Gamal Nassar, a spokesman of the Muslim Brotherhood, who was being tried in absentia at the time by Judge Nagish Hatta, the same judge presiding over our case, but in a separate terrorism trial known as Rabat Operation Room,